Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, or good morning, depending on when you're joining us and where you're joining us from. It's Marcy Thomas, and I am the founder of Brown Girl Collective and your glorious host of BGC Book Club, where I have an opportunity to talk to some of the best every week. Women who share stories and other works of art that are by, for, and about us. So, on this occasion, I welcome you to this space as we're going to get into something really beautiful, a really beautiful work of art in advance of National Poetry Month. Actually, we're going to be talking about some poetry this evening. So I am coming to you from the outskirts of Atlanta. So as you're joining us, please feel free to drop in the comments where you're joining us from so we can get an idea of who all is here to enjoy this wonderful conversation. So tonight we're going to be talking to someone that I've actually had the opportunity to speak to before, but in a different capacity. So I'm happy to have her like all to myself for the next several minutes where we can really get into her latest work of art. So we have with us Remica Bingham-Risher, who is an alumna of Old Dominion University and Bennington College. She is a Cave Canem Fellow and an Appalachian poet. Her work has been published in the New York Times, the Writers Chronicle, New Letters, Callaloo, and Essence. She is the author of Conversion, which is the winner of the Naomi Long Magic Poetry Award, What We Ask of Flesh, which was shortlisted for the Hurston Wright Award, and Starlight and Error, winner of the Diod, I might not say that right, Editions Book Award. Her first book of prose, Soul Culture, Black Poets, Books, and Questions That Grew Me Up, this right here, so I'm inviting you to pick this one up as well, was published in 2022. She is currently the Director of Quality Enhancement Plan Initiatives at ODU, Old Dominion University, and resides in Norfolk, Virginia with her husband and children. Tonight, we are here to talk about her recently released book of poetry, Room Swept Home. So without any further delay, let's welcome Remica to the room. Welcome on in. Come on in.
Hey, y'all.
Hey.
Thank you so much, Marcy. That was so sweet. I appreciate you, girl. I'm glad you had me all to yourself. This is fun.
Yeah, it's just us. Not other people in the room.
Right.
So,
hey, y'all. I see folks jumping in on those comments. Hey, y'all.
Yes, we got Miss Mary Mack. Okay, all dressed in black.
Hey. Oh, I see Karen up there. Kate,
yeah.
Hey, y'all.
Yes, so welcome to the room. So first of all, congratulations on this wonderful work of art, as I said.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Yes. So, of course, you've been doing this for a while, but what is it that feels really special about Room Swept Home?
Yeah, I have been doing this for a while. It's interesting. My first book came out in 2007. I said, man, I've been at this for a few decades now.
Right.
But this is a book about my grandmothers.
Mm-hmm.
It's in many ways the book of my dreams. I've been thinking about this book for more than a decade and had to wait a long time. I had to wait 75 years to get historical records from one of my grandmothers. And talking to grandmothers that are still living about, these women and talking through family. I mean, it's just a book that I couldn't have imagined. And I'm so grateful that I had the chance to think through history in this way.
Mm-hmm. So for those who haven't had a chance to pick it up yet, what is the book about?
Yeah.
Or the collection about, I should say.
Yeah, so I mentioned my grandmothers. Well, in 1941, my paternal great-great-great-grandmother, actually a few years before, but in 1941, she was still in Petersburg, Virginia. She was living there, and she was interviewed for the WPA slave narrative. She was born in 1859. She was enslaved. And near the end of her life, this was a project that was going on all over the country. The WPA sent writers out all over. There are thousands of these interviews because they realize, these folks who have been enslaved, they're in their 70s, their 80s, their 90s. Soon they won't be with us, and we need to capture these stories. So She was one of the folks that was interviewed. Now, the same year, my maternal grandmother was sent to the Central Lunatic Asylum for the Negro Insane in Petersburg. 9 days after she birthed her first child. Postpartum was an ongoing mystery then. And she was at the beginning of her life, only 18 years old. And so Minnie Fowlkes, the grandmother who was interviewed, and Mary Knight were within 1 mile of each other in 1941. Of course, unbeknownst to them. Well,
Right.
when I discovered that, that was something that happened, I'm a poet, so it was almost too much for me to take. So I had to kind of write through those stories. And of course, that had me thinking about all the things they did to get us here and how they welcomed in the stretched strain of folks that welcomed in me.
Yes, and it's so beautifully put together. I mean, you have, the a gift with the pen anyway,
Yeah,
but to be able to just see these stories, and it's about your family, but it's
yes,
also about women who would have been living in these times as well. So
absolutely.
of course, your research process, because I mean, you didn't just pick up and start writing.
Oh
You
no.
researched.
Oh yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what that felt like.
Sure. I mean, it's kind of odd for some to see a book of poems with a bibliography in the back, but
Yes.
yeah, for sure, there are credits because it's not just poems. There's a family tree which took its own research and lots of help from archivists and librarians and folks, and Ancestry helped a lot with that as well. But there are also credits for images, and then there's a bibliography of the things that some of the things that I used in my research, but it's a selected bibliography because my goodness, I researched this thing for 7 years. So there's so
Mhm.
much that we couldn't put into the book. And
Right.
it was, yes, you can see the
Showing some of
images
what's in
there.
there,
That's
photos
right.
and things
Please.
that you were able to find.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there's so much there. It ended up being a labor of love. I joke all the time, the acknowledgments page, I start with the Lord and then go on for half a page about all the librarians who helped me. Because
The Lord and librarians.
that's right. Thank goodness for the librarians and the archivists. A project like this doesn't get done without them. So much of my time was spent in the Library of Virginia and other libraries in Petersburg trying to research the times, right? Because
Mhm.
I had to learn about what was happening in 1941 and beyond it, right?
Mhm.
So many of the things that are here come from the research, and you find a way to kind of imagine what I said in the opening essay is kind of an alternate kind of history, because often
Mhm.
our stories are left out of the archive anyway, so we have to create those archives for ourselves.
Absolutely. And that is so important that we are able to, go in and try to find these stories and that we keep them going because of course we know we live in a time that people are trying to wipe away everything that talks about our history or where
Of
we've
course.
come from. It's like it's revisionist types of history.
Yeah.
So it's great when we can, go into those archives and, dive into our personal histories as well as what's going on in the world, around our people to know exactly what's going on. Yes, all that research paid off. Absolutely, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So now, one of the things is that the book, because you're talking about, a great great or great great
Third,
grandmother,
yeah, third great grandmother. Uh-huh.
third great grandmother,
Yeah.
then also talking about your grandmother, and then there's parts where you're really bringing yourself into the
Yeah.
narrative
Yes.
as well. I love that because just last week I was speaking with someone who was talking about things that happen to us intergenerationally. The fact that
Absolutely.
there were things happening with your grandmother that impacted your mother that impacted you.
Absolutely.
And so by the way you crafted the narrative, because it is a story told
Oh
in
yeah.
poem,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
we can kind of see how that was all woven together.
Yeah. I mean, that was the hope, right? It's always the dream that you'll be able to kind of trace, from one thing to another. For me, it was interesting. I wanted to think through getting Minnie's story down on the page, from her birth story on through to the end of her life. The same thing for Mary's story. But then, of course, beyond them, you're thinking, all right, well, how did we get here? This is what we're writing towards. So there are poems in there that hover around, the year of my mom's birth. There's a poem about the Negro Traveler's Green Book from the year she was born, 1957. And then there's a whole crown of sonnets that
Mhm.
lands really it's somewhere in between historical research and the personal, because that crown of sonnets is all after the brilliant Sadia Hartman's book Lose Your Mother, where she's on her own journey.
Mhm.
And so I'm talking through what it meant for me to be a granddaughter, a daughter, and then really the last poem that I wrote for the book is when I became a grandmother myself. So
Mm.
it's really all the way through those intergenerational lines, as you mentioned. Yeah.
Mhm. Now we'll get into it later because it is the final poem in the book, but it's
Yeah.
also the title.
The title poem. Yeah. The
The
title poem is the
room
last poem
swept
in the book.
poem.
Yeah.
So just room swept home on what's kind of the motivation for that title.
Yeah, I mean, it's a number of things. When I think about it, one, it's a first off, it's just sonically really beautiful. And so
Mhm.
I was thinking about, as a poet, we're always thinking about how does it sound? What does the sound mean? Can you create a double meaning, a double entendre with that? So, it's kind of doing a number of things. But I was thinking, we got to clean out these closets here. There's a whole lot of secrets that are here that we need to,
Mhm.
go ahead and bear witness to.
Mhm.
And also, my grandmothers, if nothing else, we were certainly a family who didn't have a whole lot of money. There was a whole lot of us, we cobbled things together, but on every side they were insistent on keeping things pristine. So,
Mhm.
I was thinking about the way they took care of what they had, right? So
Right.
cleanliness came back as a theme all throughout the book as
Does.
well,
It
right?
does.
And just, and caring for us, caring for the children.
Mhm.
So it's a double entendre that plays on kind of, all of those things. And then we come back to home, which takes on many meanings, no matter, particularly for somebody like Minnie, who had to cobble together family at one point, as many of the enslaved had to do, and the way that Black folks do anyway. We got it don't matter whose child it is, I'm taking care of this baby,
That's
right? Right.
that's
And so, we often have chosen family that become our
mhm.
blood. And that was, in many ways the case for me too. I became a step parent, and now grandparent, through all those lines. So there was so much that I was trying to pack into that title.
Okay. Yeah, because when I read you were a grandmother, I was like, huh? I said, what, huh? But now I understand.
That's right. That's right.
Now I understand.
Mhm.
Now I love that the book starts with actually a statement from
Yeah.
Minnie Lee Fowlkes.
Yeah.
And I just know if I just know I could, if I knowed how to write and had a little learning, I could put off a book on this here situation.
That's
I love
and that's a quote from her narrative. So when
yes.
when I was reading through her narrative and came to that quote that she said, "Listen, there's so much that you're missing here, boy. If I could put off a book on this here situation, there's so much information." That to me was a signal. It was
Absolutely.
a sign.
Absolutely. Because
Yeah,
you are the one
that's right.
was
That's
able
right.
to do that
Mm.
on her behalf. So I had to mention that because I'm like, oh wow, look at this. This is so powerful.
Yeah.
So now at the one of the other first things that you have in the book is something called Lost Friends.
Yeah.
A little bit about that because I found that quite interesting.
Yeah, I have the book in front of me too. I'll hold it up so hopefully people can see a little bit. But because so many of the elements are artistic elements. But when I started doing all of this research, particularly about families after the Civil War, because if there's any of the folks that are watching or that are with us and they're trying to do family history, what usually happens to Black folks when we do family research, we get stopped right at 1865 because our lines are completely blurred once we enter the period of enslavement. And so what starts popping up in particularly in Black newspapers, that started popping up everywhere after the Civil War, is this column that is literally called the Lost Friends column. And people would write in, they would, send a letter that would say something, or they would usually have someone else write the letter for them.
Right.
Sometimes it would be a pastor, they would be sending to different churches, etc. But they would say, my name is Anne. I was married to a man named James. We had 3 children. They were sold off. Here's where we lived. If you have any idea about their whereabouts, please send word to, and then they would give the address of their church. And miraculously, families were brought back together because of these columns. And I thought that was such an amazing one undertaking, that people would read these columns, and people, they would read them aloud Sundays in church. They would say, here, we're going to spend time reading the Lost Friends column. If you know anything, if any of this sounds familiar, come up and speak to the pastor. And there would be reunions. And these columns went on for years, decades, in fact, after the Civil War. People were still looking for their folks. And I came across one column, that the first line in the column was just, help me to find my people. And it really, it broke me open a little bit inside. And so I wrote, an imagined Lost Friends column of my own, because when you're doing this research for women, Minnie died in 1945. So I never got to meet many folks. Mary Knight is different. I was with her until she passed in 2007. But so many of the people that I'm looking for here were missing to me. And so I wrote the Lost Friend column that I would write myself, writing into the past. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. I love it. We have a comment here. It's amazing that people could find each other. Yes.
Right.
That's why some families stayed on or near plantations or kept their owners' surnames.
Absolutely, Karen. You're right. Absolutely.
That's right. And I mentioned to you earlier that I was in Alabama recently. We can talk about what I told you earlier in a minute. But while I was there, I actually went to the hometown that my grandfather was born in.
Oh, wow.
It's a small town called Goodwater, Alabama. There's not even 2,000 people in Goodwater at this point. But it's like, I knew he was born there. And of course, his mother, my great grandmother, would have been there as well. And it was just so meaningful to me to be in that town and, walk down a little street. It's pretty much abandoned now, but it's like I could feel the energy of my ancestors being in that, just being in that space, and saw somebody like, hey, what you doing here? And I told him who my people were. He's like, oh, you my cousin.
What? Come on.
That was hilarious, but I wasn't.
I love that. Yes, I love that. Look, family will find you wherever you are.
Right, exactly. When I told him the family name, he's like, wait a minute, we're related.
I love that.
But I mean, there's just something in that. I know a lot of times people, for a multitude of reasons, either don't think it's important or they want to forget, because we understand that there are some things in our history that definitely are not positive. We know that. But it's just something about to be able to, like in your case, do that digging, or for me, in my case, to go to that space and be on that hallowed ground, or to get that information. So, that was one of the other things I really loved about this book, because I'm like, I'm doing something similar just personally. So, So in the first section of the book, it does focus on Minnie and her lifetime, which would have been like 1859 to 1945. So of course, there are a lot of things that do talk about, what would have been happening in that time frame, some of the lives that, women would have led, or things that they would have been doing. So that was a part of your research process.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then there was lots of ethnographic research too. The book is dedicated in part to my father's mother, who's still very much alive, Shirley Bingham. Hey, Nana. So, she was Minnie's great granddaughter, was born in Minnie's bed, and knew Minnie until she was about 5 years old. And so, I interviewed her, and her sister was still living, and they gave me so much information about what was happening in Petersburg at that time, because they were really raised by Minnie in many ways. And so I started there, and then moved to the historical record that I could find to kind of fill in some of those details. And Minnie went on to live really a fascinating life. She was enslaved until she was about 6 years old. She was a midwife. So she, worked with other Black midwives in the town. In addition to being a midwife, she was a master gardener and sold her own wares at the market. It seems like with another group of women. They also, her and her husband Thomas, there was a really frightening incident with one of their children who had to go in for surgery, and a piece of equipment, scissors, were left inside their child, and they got a settlement from the hospital, and then built streets, I mean full, neighborhoods, and sold plots of lands to black teachers and black professionals in Petersburg. And all of this, something else that I found fascinating, they said she could count down to the penny. She was a fisherwoman. She would also take fish and sell her wares. But as far as we know, if she learned to read, it was very late in her life. And the black woman teacher who conducted her interview, Susie Bird, was the one who probably taught those night classes to those folks that she interviewed, those older folks in the area. There's a poem there about that as well. So I mean, really, these folks were folks who kept making a way out of no way. That saying that we had. These are folks who kept making a way out of no way. So it's fascinating.
It's definitely fascinating. Actually, I'm going to turn to one of the poems because as you were talking about the women and how they related to one another, you all really have to get this because it's so good, and you'll have a deeper understanding of what we're talking about. But I would really love for you to read, since this is a place for sisters, The Tenderness of One Woman for Another on page 34.
Oh, thank you. This poem, there are not enough poems in the world. I don't know if there ever will be, but we can work on writing them, y'all, about friendships, and especially deep women friendships. We really carry each other. Yes, it's beautiful, beautiful photo from 41, a historical photo that we were able to get from the North Carolina archives. And so for me, that was something that I felt was really imperative for me to lay out, that even during some of her most difficult times, some of Minnie's most difficult times, her friends, these women, really took care of her. So this is the tenderness of one woman for another. There was little play when I was a child. I shared secrets with no one, had no dress-up clothes or bows. I missed other little girls then. My daughters were my dolls, spitting up and weary of sleep. I was so grateful when the women came, took the crying babies from my arms, took my wash, scrubbed my kitchen to sparkling. I could barely lift my head. I was so tired, but they laid their hands on me. We, our own assembly, passing victuals, counting heads and nickels, bragging on children come by birth or fortune, loving folks' dirt, harboring it along with light, slapping our thighs when the telling gets good. We are happy to grow old together, to cross the changing streets, to be near each other, though our floorboards have worn thin. They sat watch with me when Thomas was dying. After, though the sun was going and they'd worn their good shoes, stooped down in the dirt behind the house to weed and clear the garden. In my final years, changed my bedclothes, brought willow bark and ginger, said a soft prayer, tied the healing string in knots until the moaning stopped, then took a comb to my hair.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. That's right. Come on with the snap. I appreciate you.
Gotta give it to you. I just love that because, just to see the ways that women do love one another, whether familial, family by choice, or family that are natural family, that there is something about that tenderness, as we say, of working with one another and supporting one another. Yes, you got some hand claps here as well. Yes, but it's just so powerful to see that. And everyone, if you have not read Remica's work before, you get an idea of some of the ways that she tells her tales. Because
Yeah.
But she has many different ways that she writes, and
Yeah.
so that thought that was really, really beautiful. So thank you for sharing.
Cool.
Now, um, also, of course, you talk about Marietta
Mm-hmm.
Knight, who
Mm-hmm.
you know, and she was your grandmother and her life. And one of the things that I found really interesting, you've already mentioned it, but
Mm-hmm.
that she was a young woman, a young mother, as a lot of women back then were,
Oh yeah.
if they went to high school, barely out of high school age,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And she stopped at the 6th grade and got married at 17, 18. So
right,
yeah.
right. That was just something that happened in those times,
Yeah.
but that she had, with her first child, had postpartum depression and how that was treated.
Yeah. Yeah, and this was something that we never talked about as a family until she was, really the last few years of her life. She would just start telling me things kind of as a one-off.
Hmm.
And you would hear people, we lived in Norfolk, Virginia, and that was where she was when this incident happened. And you would hear people kind of generationally, use the phrase, "Oh, well, up Petersburg, they're gonna send you up Petersburg," and I never understood what that meant, right?
Hmm.
And then she told me, "Oh no, I got sent up Petersburg. It's
Hmm.
to the asylum, to the hospital. After I had Evelyn, and Evelyn is her oldest child, the other great aunt that my book is dedicated to, and so it's so interesting that these are things that people never talked about, but it certainly colored some of her life, and that incident in particular became an institute. It seemed like an incident that elicited shame and difficulty, and then was something that she was just kind of intent to overcome.
Hmm.
As a reputation, because it was a really sordid incident. People talked about it for a long time on the street, and she really did, it seems, kind of lose herself for some time, and then like so many others, came home, raised her children, had 6 more. She worked as a domestic for all her life, and was
Hmm.
someone who, until the day she died, the two families, primary families that she worked for, sent her checks in the mail.
Hmm. You talk
I
about
said,
that.
this is fascinating. Like, what kind of person are you that they thought to make sure, that you still had some means of being cared for after you left these homes, and then raised us, a woman of a deep faith that was passed on to us, and that comes through as well. So, I mean, there's so many things that end up being extraordinary about these women who otherwise wouldn't be part of the historical record.
Right, right, and that's something. And this is kind of in advance of letting you all know there is another Brown Girl Collective space that is forthcoming that is just
Mm.
for the purpose of women being able to tell stories. So not necessarily
Ooh,
book based,
but I
but
love
just
it.
talking to women because we all have things in our lives. Shoot, I have a story to tell. A lot of women have stories to tell that
Absolutely.
might never be in a book or get recorded on some type of grand scale, but it
Yeah,
doesn't mean that our stories aren't important. So y'all,
that's
that's coming. Hopefully in May, but
I'll
that's
get
something
ready.
I'm working on because I just think that that is so important for us to tell our own stories. And then if we have people like the women in your lineage whose stories need to be told, to be
That's
able to
right.
do that. So
That's right.
that is forthcoming. But I just found it really, there's a poem that talks about, just the process of how she went into the asylum temporarily.
Yep.
Her it felt like a long time, but
Yeah.
it really wasn't as long as thank you, Abby.
Yeah.
But yes, it really wasn't as long as it might have felt like in that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it also made me think about, I don't know if you've had a chance to read Madness
I
by Tony
haven't
Lee.
yet. It's on my list. I haven't had a chance. It came out around the same time as my book.
Right, it
So
did.
we've been on tour at the same time. So it's one of the, 3 or 4 that came out around the same time. That's like, ooh, as soon as I get done, I can dive into these books.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I did get a chance to interview her as well. So if you all look that up Antonia Hilton Madness, or the book as well. But it made me think about just the way that the people were treated, Black people specifically, in terms of mental health and and things like that. Because this is kind of new how we are now. Like, oh, go to therapy, do this, do that.
Right.
That wasn't always a thing. We know that, and just the way that people were treated. And one of the things, and I mean, it's not that long. You can read it if you would like. But one of the things that I found in her master index case record was how they tried to help her, so to speak.
Yeah, I haven't read that poem, so we should read it. I'll tell people master index case record, and maybe we can hold it up and kind of show it to them. This really truly is based on her. Yeah, you can see it a little bit. Is based on her records. There you go. You can see the check mark. So it's set up to be a poem that's like an intake form that you would fill out coming to a hospital. So it starts with name, date, all of that, and we'll read it. And then also it's a found poem, so it uses some language from her actual health records that I had to wait 75 years because of for and HIPAA laws. And I requested from Central State Hospital, which is still a hospital that is in use. It is now a regular hospital in Petersburg, and one of the very, very few hospitals that was not only a hospital that was set up specifically for African Americans, but was set up as an asylum for mental health, but kept all of their records. So many of those, that's right, many of those records were destroyed. And some of them were lost because it's old. These are old records, but they had many of their records. So they sent me 30 pages of her records once I proved our lineage. And so some of the things here are actually from her records, and some of them are from articles about what I found were happening in the asylum. So this is Master Index Case Record. Name, Night, Mary. Date, June 18th, 1941. Recurrence, visit 1, 2, 3, or more. 1. Age, 19, though husband adds a year, perhaps out of fear. Occupation, domestic. Reason, this is Mary talking. Had my first baby June 9th. Doctor came late. No afterbirth, no blood, then profanity. Current symptoms, behavior. Frequent attacks of destructiveness. Seems to be aware of approach of mental storm. Disturbed at intervals. Uses very profane language. To be completed. A survey of the family. It is of the highest importance to have as fully as possible a conception of the individual before she became afflicted. Committed as insane. Patient watch, suicidal. Diagnosis, manic depressive psychosis. In the future, we will call it postpartum psychosis. Complaints, again, Mary's voice. I do not think I have all that belongs to me. Treatment plan. As resistive behavior from a population considered to be naturally docile and tractable is cause for alarm, we'll employ a coercive use of hydrotherapy, such as the continuous baths of varying temperatures, cold douches, and the wet pack to calm the agitated mind and to control the recalcitrant body. Elements of both treatment and discipline, mechanical and chemical, restraint and seclusion, must show ability and willingness to work. To prove her wellness and worth before release, patient will be employed making beds, dusting furniture, sweeping floors, working in the laundry, work in the kitchen, work in the dining room. After she is nearly broken, patient must have in her right mind and on numerous occasions expressed a desire to go home.
Yeah, that's deep. But I
Yeah.
wanted you to read that because when I read it, it's like, first of all, whoa, the fact that this treatment plan, this
Yeah.
hydrotherapy and baths and
Yeah. And that was one of the things she talked about often, the showers, the way that they would use water as kind of a torture device. Um, and, it harkened back to, it was strange doing this research. I thought this was happening to her as a child in 41. And then there's a poem that comes up later in the book as I was thinking about what she saw raising her own children. And when she saw those children being hosed during the, civil rights movement, did that make her harken back to the time that she spent at the asylum when they were using that same kind of treatment to try to coerce them into, you know, behaving, whatever that meant. So, I mean, there's so many things that are there, and so many connections for us.
and the thing of work, which
Yeah.
in my head, I'm thinking enslavement.
Yep.
I'm thinking,
Yeah.
sharecropping, all this
Yes.
thing. We're basically going to work you to death.
Right. And then, once you've been worked to death, you have to, the only thing that gets you out of here is for you to now behave as if you are in your right mind, whatever we feel that is. And for you to say, I want to go home. Well, of course I want to go home.
Right.
Look at the way I'm being treated. So it was, and there's so many people who spent, you mentioned the time that she was there all her life. She told me she was there long enough to have another baby. So she felt like she was there for 9 months. But her record showed me that she was there for 2 months and 13 days, but also then had a year of probation where she had to check in. So there it was kind of in the middle, right? But there were people who were taken to the asylum on what we now would consider absolutely no mental health issue at all, and then spent their entire lives there, never left. So it's so much for us to think about, the way folks were treated and how people were handled and why
And
there's
why.
so much context there.
Right. And, thinking of even what's happening now with, if someone has, a mental health
That's right.
issue and how they may be treated,
That's right.
by, law enforcement or
Absolutely.
holding people in the carceral state.
Absolutely.
So
It's a direct line, right? When we talk about lineage, it's a direct line.
it's a direct
So
line.
it's so much, this for me was context for me. It helped me re-examine what I knew about where I was standing right here in the present.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so much. So a lot of times when people think that certain things are new, it ain't new.
It's nothing new under the sun.
Nothing new under the sun. So thank you for sharing that because I
Yeah.
just thought that was important to see. And, now, when we have people or our own selves are able to get certain help, realize that how much of a blessing that is
That's
when we
right.
are.
To be able to advocate for ourselves, to have
Yes.
agency, and actual care. Yeah. Yeah. It's a blessing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Also, I'm making sure I'm staying in the right section. Something that's a little bit lighter.
Yeah.
I also liked Tweedledee, Laverne Baker.
Oh yeah.
That is fun because that makes me just think about, the joy in the midst of all
That's
the other
right.
things that can be going on around us.
That's right. And it's interesting. I'm trying to find the page number. There you go, 63.
63.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. And so, music shows up a lot in this book. My family always loved music, and my grandmother in particular used to love music. And, this was a song that, I remember hearing and playing out, and realize it wasn't a song that everybody else knew. But if I put it on, I knew she would dance. And so, just kind of looking back at when the song came into the world and thinking about who she was at that moment, she was definitely making sure she was a seamstress. She made sure that she made clothes for her children. She was, embarking on her path to faith at this time. But, I imagine her dancing. That's right. I imagine her dancing whenever that song came on. And if y'all, In the audiobook, I sing it a little bit, so I think it's only
Uh-oh.
fair that we do that. If you don't know the song. So Tweedly deedly deedly dee, Tweedledee, Laverne Baker,
All right, yeah,
1950.
you got a little something going on there. Wait a minute. I'm gonna have to go back and listen to the audio just so I can hear it. But please share the poem. Absolutely.
I make my own joy, sewing the girls' dresses. Put the needle between my teeth, spin thread around the bobbin, press the pedal to the rhythm on the radio. Beauty at my hands like creation. What I dream, I see, comes to be. Saturday, sun rising, and soon Miss Terry will knock to share the word. She talks about Jehovah like he's a friend to me. It's peaceful with the music on. The children run down the block. Their voices echo and volley, chorus of mother's hours. Given time, I'll embroider flowers, initials in each collar. I'll make them matching sets. Maybe add a row of lace. I am swaying and bolting fabric in place. Nimble and sharp, the pleats are near perfect. Nothing's wasted. I'm happiest when I can hold my gifts. I count it as grace to dance, roll my hips. Johnny takes the back steps and finds me singing. Tweedly, tweedly, tweedly dee. He spins me around the room till we are dizzy, till the oven timer buzzes, till another song plays. Laughing, ears ringing, I iron the dresses, careful of everything I've made. Thank you. Thanks for the snaps. I see you guys in the comments. Thank you,
Yeah,
Kayla. I
that
see you
is
guys.
so good. That is so good. And I wanted to invoke that because
Yeah.
we know that as Black people, there can be a lot of stuff going on around us,
Oh
but
yeah.
we find ways to find joy, whether it's in, that music or, being able to create something with our own hands
That's right.
or, writing or whatever that thing is. We,
That's
sitting around playing, I'm not a card player, but, sitting around playing cards and talking
yeah.
trash, whatever the case may be, we find things to do to help evoke joy. And I just really wanted you to share that for that reason. And I didn't know you could sing like that. So
I thank you. That was another love. That's what I thought I'd be doing before poetry bit me in the 5th grade. But I mean, I really, I appreciate you. And I have to thank poet L. Lamar Wilson, who, I used to never, ever, ever sing at poetry readings. I used to keep them very separate. And he told me that's one of your gifts. Like you can't ignore the music in your work and the music that's in you. So, I'll throw in a line when it's appropriate here and there. But joy in particular, not only, in music, even though that's one of the things that finds its way back into my work often. I was intent, I knew this book had to begin in trauma. There was no way around it. Right. So I wanted to build in as much beauty and joy as I possibly could throughout. Because that's also really, these women, they managed to both live to 84, to get numerous children, 7 children here on both sides of them. They had 7 living children that made their way into the world. And also taught all of us how to be joyful. So I thought it was imperative that we built in joy for these women.
And what I love about it is joy in simple, quote unquote, simple things.
That's right. That's right. Because that's what you do.
I'm sorry.
Joy. I said that's what you do. You find joy where it is. Right.
Right. Exactly. So we make and create memories, which is joy at its best. I like to say, absolutely, Abby. That is so true. Because a lot of times, we are currently living in a time where people think that oftentimes the joy is about the things that you have or the places that you can go. But it's in those simple things. And I just really want to share that. So, and believe it or not, we're getting down to the last 15 minutes.
Man, the time flew by.
That's when you're having like really good conversation.
That's right.
The next section, you talk about what we had to pass through to get here.
Hmm.
So, what is that section of the book about?
I'm so glad you asked that because nobody has yet. I appreciate you. For me, it was really important. As we were going through, as I was going through all of this history, that after I finished their sections, really, I was figuring out, so what does this mean for us today? Right?
Mhm.
All of these things, all of these lines that we're tracing. And I'm writing this book in a tumultuous time, so things are happening on the news, things are happening in our lives. We're writing through a pandemic. January 6th happens. People are banning books and thinking about race. So all of those things, what is the American story that we're passing through to get here? And so I figured I would craft some poems that kind of talk through some of that. Yeah.
Okay, and I definitely enjoy that as well.
Yeah.
There's one without necessarily reading them all. Well, one I want you to just talk about a little bit.
Sure.
The very first one in that
Okay.
section, commemorative headdress for her
Oh,
journey beyond heaven.
yeah. That poem, I have to say, that poem wouldn't exist without another brilliant writer that you all have had, and that I saw her gorgeous picture as part of the opening shot. Honore Fanon Jeffers is a
Yes.
dear friend of mine, and was curating this list. She's an American antiquarian. She also, the reason that this book has a bibliography is because her book, The Age of Phyllis, a wonderful book of poems that traces the life of Phyllis Wheatley Peters,
Mhm.
has a bibliography, and it's heavily researched. And I thought, oh, thank goodness, that's something we can do in poems. But
Right.
she was doing a project and said, what poems are you writing from the early American period that we can maybe see? And I said, I don't know how far this book is going back yet, honey. I don't know, how far I'm going back. And as I was thinking that through, I was researching Nat Turner, 1831, and realized that all of the laws started changing and becoming more strident for the runaways after
Mhm.
the Nat Turner incident, of course. And so I wrote this poem, Commemorative Headdress for Her Journey Beyond Heaven, about a woman who's enslaved. Certainly not Minnie, because Minnie doesn't even come into the world until 1859. But kind of looking at who these women were that were brave enough to try to leave the plantation. Some became maroons who lived in the Great Dismal Swamp. I didn't realize that was part of the legacy of history. Also, there are, is all this research about Black folks in different parts of the world. And I know we are as ingenious as other Black folks are, who often braided maps into their hair. And
Mhm.
so I have other women on the plantation that night braiding the map to freedom in her hair.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
that's beautiful. I love that because just like some of the seeds of the things that we have here in the U.S., because
Hmm.
people they put it in the hair
Come
and
on.
they didn't know where they were going. They just like, okay,
Yeah.
me,
That's
so
right. That's right.
it just shows our like you said, our ingenuity
That's
and
right.
our creativity
Yeah.
and also our willingness to figure out ways to survive and thrive.
That's right. That's right. And our fearlessness. Our
Yes.
fearlessness. Yep.
Yes, I love that. I love
Yeah.
that. In that section, there's also a poem that talks about something that happened right after you were born. That for me,
Oh,
kind of shows that the more things change, the more things stay the same.
yeah. Yeah. Um, you know, as you're doing research, you're also researching yourself.
Mm.
I won't read that poem, but there's a picture of
Oh
me,
yeah,
my
you
mom,
got it.
and
So I
my
just want to say,
daddy.
look at the little
Come
baby.
on. Look at
Look
me,
at
my mom, and my daddy. Ain't they cute?
look at
Um,
that.
and so, you know, I realized that, I realized that some of the historical moments that were happening right before I was born were things that, new parents are always afraid of everything, I imagine. And I was their first child, and they got stationed in Germany soon after, and we're alone. And there was this news story that I came across that said the last lynching in America, Michael Donald, and I didn't know anything about Michael Donald, who was killed by some young members of the KKK. in 1981, 25 days after I was born. And so I imagine that being the top news story, and my mother now with this new baby thinking, what in the world, what can I do to protect this child? That poem, we won't read it, but I hope people grab it. But it's dedicated to Beulah May Donald, who is Michael Donald's mother, who please look her up, because she's one of those mothers who changed everything and eventually sued the KKK and bankrupted them. So it was kind of the end of the KKK in the modern era in many ways, because this woman said, you took my child and I'm not going to stand for it. And in the poem, there's a line that says, mothers are gods again, and they will not go quietly. And I feel like all these mothers, continue to protect us in many ways.
Absolutely. Yes. So Beulah May
Beulah May
McDonald.
Donald. Yeah.
Donald.
Beulah May
Okay.
Donald.
Donald. Look her up.
Look her up.
Learn more about what she did, because it just shows you, like we said a few minutes ago, there's a level of fearlessness.
That's right.
That so many of us today and even throughout history have had to, to fight for our families, to fight for ourselves, to fight for our freedom, and all of those things. So I just think that that's beautiful to be, even in the midst of something that isn't necessarily a positive story, to be able to see, her strength and her courage, or the strength and courage that we have in that. So the next to last section is several poems, and the Lose Your Mother suite. So we really won't have time to like read them per se, because it's several. How many? It's about how many in there? About 12.
So a crown of sonnets is a form where the last line becomes the first line of the next poem. And so a sonnet has 14 lines, so there's 14 poems that end up being in the crown. And then you have one final sonnet that uses all of the lines together. And then I added a +1 because I also wanted to use Saidiya Hartman's lines. So there's an extra. So there's 16 there.
Okay. And it's just beautiful. And I did catch that, how the beginning and the beginning. So in the midst of doing it, what was it that made you want to include this type of work within the context of the collection?
Yeah, I was crazy. I really and truly, I never had an intention of writing a crown of sonnets. But that is probably, kind of where the personal really intersects the most in the book. And I realized that really so much of what I was reading, so much of my own living, they started bleeding together. It was getting real difficult for me to make any separation of the thing. That's also the section where that the last poem I wrote for the book, that poem about my grandson, ends up showing up. And so since they were so intertwined, it became a natural form for one to start with the ending of the next and the next.
And so Saidiya Cento, you mentioned that was one that you added?
Yeah. Since they all, every poem in that suite, they all start with lines from Saidiya Hartman's Lose Your Mother. So that book, the Lose Your Mother text, becomes really a guiding text for those. And so at the very end, I put all of the titles, all of those quotes together as their own poem and named it for Saidiya Hartman, because she's a genius and we should give her all her flowers.
Yes, I love that. But that, as I was reading, it's such a powerful book. I just have to say that to everyone who's watching or who will watch later. As you and I were talking about before we came on, sometimes people, poetry is a different type of vibe for people. Which I don't know why, because it's, it's brilliant. but just to be able to have an understanding of kind of what went into it. I love that you're, able to share that, and we're able to see and have an understanding of, the why and the importance of it. And I love the fact that you bring other things in, whether it's music or whether it's art or, whether it's, the writings of others. Because really, when you think of us and our creativity, it spans so many different things. It can be in the clothing that we wear, the way we adorn ourselves. and the food we eat, our creativity shows up in so many ways, and how powerful it is for someone like you to take all of that, synthesize it, and put it into words that the average ones of us probably never could.
Well, I thank you. I mean, our creativity is something to behold, but for me, it's collaborative, even in my mind. That's why the work of so many other people, so many of the poem titles actually end up being quotes. If you look at the notes section, you'll see, I'm really riffing off of all of these other brilliant people who've done so much work before me.
And that's really powerful. So the very last section is what survived.
There.
And I love. Oh wait, I gotta show this one though.
Okay.
And look at the baby.
Oh, right. That's right. One of my favorite pictures. My mother had my hair done. I had my beads. Remember when you had your braids with your foil?
Oh yeah. I got a picture like that.
Honey, I just knew I was a cute picture day. I was 4 or 5.
Yes, yeah. I love that. I love that. There is a poem in there that I would like for you to read because it's so powerful. I mean, all of them are, but this one in particular is on page 114. There is nothing in your story that says you should be here.
That's so sweet. I thank you so much. It's interesting. I told you before, we came. I don't know if I said it for the audience or not, but if y'all saw me looking over, my husband's sitting right here. And it's apropos that you would choose that poem, because this is a poem that wouldn't be written if I hadn't been talking his ear off about the book. He's definitely he is my first critic in the best way. I take all my ideas to him. He's the one that has to listen to me sitting up complaining about, the fact that I don't know if I'm going to get this right. But I was talking so much about, it's just amazing. Isn't it amazing that we've all made it here through all of this? And he said to me, where's that poem in the book? That poem isn't anywhere in the book. You have to write that poem. And thanks to him, that's the poem that you're asking for. So what a
thank you, Mr. Risher. Thank you.
He's cracking up right now. So this poem is: there is nothing in your story that says you should be here. Let's just call it what it is: miraculous, or nothing but time and chance, a hair's breadth of the divine sense of humor. What wasn't planned, but tickled everyone watching. First, the nearly indestructible forced onto ships, then babies born on plantations, surviving the South, daughters and sons impatient and fearless, heading north. A girl follows her sister from Norfolk to Fort Monmouth. A boy sees her picture on a mantle and vows to marry her. That was my parents. His father fell in love with a waitress in Petersburg who served him sweet potato pie and milk, a baby herself, and he slick-sleeved, just stationed at Fort Lee. He carried her as far from there as he could, on and on this love, up the coast, in the heart of all wars. Children die and children gather. One finds another, and every star extends its hand to a new windswept door. There should be no possibility of you, but here you are, an opening, a crossing, and here every instrument brimming with sound, every seed a body inconspicuous in the garden. You are a spectacular disruption, a tempest. And with that knowledge that you have been remarkably made, call to yourself in the distance. The world will arrive to meet you, and you will not be afraid.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the Hey, amen. I appreciate y'all.
Yes, that is so beautiful. And even though that's not the last poem in the book, I feel like that's a perfect place for this conversation.
Yeah.
To, begin to come to a close, because we need to understand that's all of us.
That's right.
That's
That's right.
all of us.
We're remarkably made. So
We are remarkably.
hold that for yourself.
Hold that. Hold that.
Mm-hmm.
Hold that.
Yeah,
We all need to do that, because sometimes it's not easy when
that's
you
right.
see and hear or exposed to different things that
That's
will
right.
lead you to believe different.
Yeah.
Hold on to that. Hold on to that. We do have some fresh comments.
Oh,
Thank you for
thank you.
sharing and coming to visit.
Oh,
Yes, thank you,
thanks,
Abby.
Abby. Thank
Your
you.
work is very much appreciated here.
Thank
You
you.
ladies are the best, as are
Oh,
you. You are so welcome.
thank you.
Karen is saying, that's my
Oh,
soror. Great.
hey, Karen. I saw your skin comment too. Thank you, baby. We appreciate it. She gave us compliments. Yeah.
Yes. And so excited to read this book. Please do.
Oh,
Please
thank you
do.
so much.
And
Thank
to
you.
the poem, yes, yes, and yes. And Abby Grace again says, love that last poem. This was great. So yeah, all of the wonderful
Karen.
love and comments are coming in. And I, feel especially blessed to have had you
Mm,
here. You're always going to have a home here. Know that.
For real.
Wherever
We
you
need spaces. We need spaces. That's
oh,
funny.
Robert, is that your
But
husband?
that's my daddy. He said
Your
wonderful
daddy.
face. He
Hey,
calls me little
daddy.
face because he says I look like my mom. Hey, daddy. Thank you.
Oh, that is too funny.
Thank you, daddy. Yeah.
Chica saying you are so
Oh,
awesome. Yes, all of the love is pouring in from all around,
yeah.
including the familial love. So that's such a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So I know, we talked about a little bit beforehand. You have kind of been on a whirlwind since the book came out
Yes.
early last month. You
Yes.
got some things, throughout the rest of this month and leading into April, which is actually National Poetry Month.
Yeah.
So are there any particular places or spaces where people can look to find you if they want to come out and meet you in person and get their book signed?
Oh, you're wonderful. I mean, you can see my Instagram running across the ticker. That's the best place to follow me. I try to make sure that all the events are there at Remica Writer. I'll be in Charlottesville on Friday at the Virginia Festival of the Book. So if anybody's in Virginia and coming to Charlottesville, I'll be there at 11 reading with some folks. In DC, we got a reading at Loyalty Books on April the 4th. In Petersburg at Resist Books on Saturday, April the 6th. So we got some in-person events and more virtual stuff. So please follow me. I'll follow back and send me messages. It's really me. Nobody's running the Instagram. So definitely, if you want to reach out to me, please do. I'd love to see you.
Absolutely. And I pray that people will definitely do that. Also, of course, you can pick up your books wherever you would like. But however, there is a Brown Girl Collective, Brown Girl Collective bookstore, and the book is there. If you'd like to go there, you can find it. It is affiliated with bookshops. So if you buy books through Bookshop, that is a space where you can go and find it. And, it's a little bit of support for the work that I do as well. Hey, just have to.
That's right. And if you buy it there, if you go to browngirlcollectivebookstore.com and grab it there and just send me a screenshot of your receipt, I'll send you a signed book plate that you can put. A personalized signed book plate that you can put in your book.
All right. You heard it here. So yes, just keep that in mind as well. And so thank you so much, Remica. I really did enjoy talking to you. I said this wasn't the first time, but it's the first time we had this intimate space, just you and me together. And I am looking forward to doing it again, because I know that you always going to be bringing the fire, be bringing the heat.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to keep trying. I appreciate it, y'all. And I appreciate this space, Marcy. Thank you. Thank you for continuing to give us a space to talk about words and bring our light. I appreciate you, sis.
Absolutely. But actually, normally I take you off screen, but somebody that knows you, that says they've been following you around the interwebs, is going to be here next week.
Okay.
Delana.
Oh, Delana. Look, let me tell you something. It's right here. Hey, Redwood Court. Delana, my love. We've known each other for a long time, for 2 decades, as long as we've been writing. So
right.
Book. Y'all grab Redwood Court and come back for that conversation.
Yes, she will be here next week, because when I posted the video, she's like, it seems like I'm just following the around.
Because our books came out on the same day. Books were released on February 6th, and we have been following each other around.
Right.
We love each other, so it don't matter.
Yes, and it's also a book about the South, taking place in Columbia, South Carolina,
right.
which I actually lived there for a few years, and my mother
Oh,
lived there for many, many years.
my
So I
goodness.
can't wait for us to get in and talk about that. Okay, somebody's
Right.
saying they just met her. Okay, yes, you are
Oh, you've
being.
been everywhere, girl. You've been, I know
Yes,
you. I have a breath.
okay.
You've been hitting the road.
Yes, so come on back next week for that powerful conversation, which I know it's going to be. And just stay tuned because this year, at the end of last year, I said the whole plan was more in 2024. And we've been bringing the heat over here.
More.
So
That's right.
stay tuned. If you're not on YouTube, please follow the YouTube channel, subscribe, because that way you get everything there. You know exactly what's coming out, because sometimes it might be a little challenging to find it in the other places, but YouTube, everything is there. I think to date I have done 190 interviews. So yeah, there's a
Oh my
lot
goodness, Marcy.
going on.
Kudos to Marcy. Y'all give her some, some praise in the comments. Appreciate you, sis.
Yes, so thank you, everyone. If you could just hold on for me for one moment, I'm gonna bid everybody else adieu. But everybody have a great night. Thank you so much for tuning in, and please continue to share this out. Please continue to buy the books, all of that great stuff. We do appreciate you. We love you, and we'll see you again next week. Take good care. All right, bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.